Hey, Tom Llewellyn from Civil, and recipes for American success, and hopefully a little good food, right? Hey, always like to start with a joke. So kind of imagine two presidents, let's call them Boris and Bill, are talking to each other, and Boris goes, hey, I've got 100 security people, and I know one of them is a traitor, but I can't figure out which one it is. So Bill goes, hey, I got the same problem. I've got 100 economists. I have to listen to them all before I make a decision. And I know one of them is telling the truth. And the guy, Boris goes, it kind of sounds like we have the same problem. And so Bill goes, yeah, but it's a different one every time, and I don't know who it is. Which is what, economics is kind of like. It's kind of like there's a whole bunch of opinions. At the end of the day, everybody's flipping a coin and going, let's do this. It's a little less challenging than that, but, hey, the number of mistakes made at the federal level about the economy is pretty crazy. In fact, it exacerbated the Depression. A couple of Federal Reserve things and a couple of where they increase rates instead of decreasing or decrease, blah, blah, blah. You don't need to know all that, but, understand it's a lot of guesswork. Well, and it's just like Pesto. It can be a lot of guesswork. You want to mix and match and do stuff. And productivity is a little bit the same. So if you look at what's the equation that the government use, it's just generally how much did we produce? How many pieces of stuff, how much production was there, divided by the number of hours we worked in America. And you get a percentage, right? And hopefully that's positive, because when it's negative, obviously it's really, really bad. But if it's positive, it's good. And if it's low positive, like 0.01 or 0.02, something tiny, it's not good. If it's over 1%, it's kind of okay. If you could get near 2 on a regular basis, it's extraordinary, right? If you looked at economic growth, let's say, not productivity, over the last 200 years, it's been about 1.8%, which isn't great, but that includes really big dips and pretty good rises, right? So good economy, as we talked about before, is 4.5% growth. Bad economy is anything below 1%, maybe 2%, which is kind of the average this century. But at the end of the day, productivity has that government measure that kind of gives this big look, but there's other ways to look at it. We talked about last week about the virtuous cycle. Well, a cycle has that productivity piece in it. I got a little capital. I got this light bulb over here, and I'm going to invest in this new idea that's supposed to increase my productivity. Right? Did the supply chain operate better? Is my manufacturing line more efficient? Is the product we produce less expensive and more valuable? And it'll give you an idea over time. So I had a 1960 Chevy, right? I mean, it was a 2-speed flathead 6, that got about 15 miles a gallon. And it was an Albatross, big, huge wings. It was a pretty ugly car. But if you move forward to today, 65 years ahead. Now, let's go last year. Last year was the last year Chevy, I think, produced a sedan, the Malibu. It cost about $25,000. It cost $25,000, but it was like unbelievably better than a 1960 Chevy. I think it had a 6-speed transmission. I think automatic windows, air conditioning. Disc brakes. All kinds of stuff. I mean, huge amounts of improvements. But imagine if there were none of those improvements. And today you were still buying a Chevy that maybe looked a little better, but at the end of the day, it was the piece of crap I had, right? But you're paying $25,000 for it, right? No productivity? Well, nobody's going to buy a $25,000 Chevy that operates like a 1960 Chevy. They're going to go buy a Kia, right, or whatever. So, at the end of the day, you got to have more productivity because you got to produce better products, if only for the competition and to keep your customers, right? So companies have to operate with this capital infusion on a regular basis, finding more productivity. And that's what why capitalism works, socialism doesn't, is it keeps increasing the productivity of, whatever product they're doing. I mean, whatever product they're doing. But here's what doesn't happen. The government doesn't focus on productivity for itself. It just spends, wild amounts of money, mostly for political reasons that sound really well intentioned. I mean, Social Security and Medicare sound like great programs, but they should have changed 40 years ago in terms of how they fund themselves, right? This intergenerational tax where the workers are paying for my check each month worked 50, 60 years ago when there were 160 workers per retiree. Well, now there's 3. Doesn't work, right? It just doesn't work. You can't raise taxes high enough, often enough to make it work. War on poverty is exactly the same thing. We spent somewhere between $2 and $4 trillion on poverty-related things. The poverty rate's the same, almost the same after 60 years. Anybody ever say, are we doing this the right way? Maybe we need to think about something that's more productive. And that goes back to education, same thing. Man, if we educated everybody to proficiency, our economic growth would be extraordinary. But we only do, 3 in 10. And that's been the same for 60 years, even though we're spending 3.5 times the amount per student. They're not getting any smarter, right? And that goes for just about every program the government has ever run, right? So this productivity thing, when somebody says, oh, productivity grew 1.2%, that's kind of okay, right? Just so you know. But if somebody said, oh, let's apply the equations to government programs where they own the means of production, like a regular business, which is, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the anti-poverty programs, education, you name it, they own the means of production. They need to be more productive. If we measured the productivity of government programs, there would be a bunch of negative red numbers. And you can fix them all. You could fix them all if you just focused on productivity. Right, anyway, I'm Tom Llewellyn. Have some fun. Keep laughing, man. If you're not laughing, there's a big problem. Go do something different. If you're not happy, go do something different. So keep smiling and know that if just a few things about economics, your vote becomes extremely valuable. Anyway, Tom Llewellyn, enjoy yourselves.